Welcome to Behind the Mystery with Lee Strauss. And this is the Strauss Cafe podcast. I'm Lee Strauss, and this is my husband and co-host, Norm Strauss. And at Behind the Mystery, we are talking about, right now we're talking about the Ginger Gold Mystery Series, and we're going to start with the first book, Murder on the SS Rosa, which was written by myself, Lee Strauss. And just to give a little bit of insight, I have a book right here. We're going to talk about Murder on the SS Rosa and this fictional world of Ginger Gold. And I'm hoping that you have already read some Ginger Gold, which is why you're interested in stopping in and having a look at this video. But if not, I'm going to expound on this. So Ginger Gold is a new character, or was a new character that I developed in, I think I started thinking about her in 2016. And I started writing Murder on the SS Rosa in 2017, in the January winter months when we were in Mexico one time. So I'll just read a little bit of the blurb just to kind of get a jumping off space here. Murder in the Jazz Age. It's 1923, and young war widow fashionista Ginger Gold makes a cross-Atlantic journey with her companion Haley Higgins to London, England to settle her father's estate. When the ship's captain is found dead, Ginger is only too happy to lend her assistance to the handsome Chief Inspector Basil Reed. So the thing about this book and the first character of Ginger is, I don't know.
The first thing about it?
It's like, sometimes you have so much you can say that you don't know where to start. And that's sort of how I feel right now. So maybe you should ask me some questions.
Okay. So Ginger Gold, before she met Basil, just for background, was married to Lord Daniel Gold, right?
Right, yes.
And so how many years after Lord Daniel Gold, which is why Ginger has the title of Lady Gold, he was killed in the First World War. Towards the end, wasn't it? Yes, it was.
Yeah, so the very end in 1918.
If you want to read about that, we have a two-book volume called The Velvet Spy.
Yes, but we will probably do a podcast on that at some point.
So my question is, because I'm not 100% sure of the timeline here, so how long after Lord Daniel Gold's death did SS Rosa take place, and meeting now Basil?
Okay, that is a good question. Thank you. That's helpful. Ginger Gold was married to Lord Daniel Gold. She is a British citizen. She was born in London. But her mother died in childbirth, and so her father brought her to America and really got his wealth through, steel and stuff, and married an American woman. So she was raised in Boston, but was, spent the first 8 years of her life or something in England. So she was very British as well. And back in that time, and even now, titles were really important and they're interesting now, but the idea was Daniel Gold and Ginger were a planned sort of a
prearranged
marriage. So they were family friends of George Hartigan, and Hartigan was going to give them some money in exchange for Ginger getting the title. So it started off as an arranged marriage, but they actually hit it off, and it turned out to be a real love story, which ended tragically at the end of World War I when Daniel died. And this is all well known. This is not spoiler, because when you open up this book, it's pretty mentioned early on that he had passed away in the war. And this book starts in 1923. I'm not sure why exactly. I can't remember why I chose 1923 and not say 1920 or 21, 22. But so she's going back. Her father has passed away, and she's going back to England to settle her affairs. She's inherited her childhood home, and she's thinking she's going to go back and sell it and then just return to Boston. And she's traveling with her companion friend, Nurse Haley Higgins, who they're an unlikely friendship. They met during the war in sort of some strange circumstances, which I won't get into right now. But after the war, it turned out that Haley came to become an in-house nurse for Ginger's father. She also has ambitions to become a doctor, which happened for female women would become doctors in those times, but not very often. And there was a school in London called the London Medical School for Women. So she had applied and got accepted, and so this sort of coincided for when Ginger was going across. So they crossed together. So they are together on the SS Rosa, along with Ginger's little dog, Boston Terrier, who was a gift to her from her father from when she came home without her husband. And so we've got Ginger Gold and Haley Higgin and Boss on first class. They are high society. Well, Ginger's a high society lady, comes from wealth. Haley Higgins is more middle class, I guess, although she becomes wealthy over time. But they're both really different characters. You know, Ginger's fashionista, likes all of the fashion, and Haley is a no-nonsense kind of person in her views of the world and how she approaches life and in how she dresses. And so Ginger meets Basil on the Murder on the SS Rosa. At first she doesn't know he's a chief inspector from Scotland Yard. There's an attraction that happens, but she's still very sort of emotionally devoted to Daniel. But she's not against, dancing, doing a bit of Charleston with him, in the musical jazz scene that was happening on the ship. And then, of course, when the murder happens, that's when his vocation comes to light. And there's a little bit of friction there now because Ginger also has a tendency to love to investigate things that are not, as they seem.
At that time, had she already started investigating things, or was this I don't think so, right?
Not technically murder mysteries per se, but she always had a keen eye for, if things were missing or things are, she's just very observant, and her time as a spy in World War I gave her a lot of gifts or skill sets that really helped her to pursue investigative type of things. She's just a naturally curious person as well, and so. But yeah, this would be, I think, the first time she got involved in a murder investigation.
So the tension that you mentioned, tension between Basil and Ginger, so Basil's vocation comes to light. Mm-hmm. Does the tension I've read the book, so I kind of know already, but just for people who haven't read the book yet, that tension comes because Ginger is kind of saying things about the investigation to Basil or suggesting things, or how does that?
Well, the tension comes because she starts investigating as well, which means she's creating a list of suspects. She and Haley together, they were on board, and that's the thing when you're on a ship, it's like a closed room mystery almost, in that everybody's on board, no one can leave. And so also certain parts of the ship, I guess, can be contained that way as well. So they're busy investigating who potential suspects are, who's acting suspicious, who could have a motive. And these are all things that the police detectives want to do. They don't want somebody at first sight who just looks like a flighty, sort of nosy person getting in their way.
Right.
because in the beginning of the SS Rosa, it was the beginning of the series for me as well. And so I was just getting to know Ginger as a character too, and trying to develop her as a person. And so that was part of the discovery, is just what type of person she is. And I didn't have the advantage of having the Velvet Spy and all her back history that was developed over the course of 5 or 6 years.
Right.
So in a way, the being on the ship, this sort of voyage from the US to England, it was sort of symbolic of a massive life change for Ginger in her personal life as well. So that's more or less about the book, but I do want to talk about, and what we want to talk about when we unwrap all these books in this series, are the historical insights. So one of the key things, the obvious things, is steamship travel. What can you tell me about what you've learned about steamship travel?
Well, this was still back very much in the heyday of steamship travel. Steamships started to get phased out maybe 15 years later. So at this time, it was really the only thing they knew is how to travel on a steamship. So is not too long after the war. So this whole kind of almost cross-cultural pollination between Europe and the United States, well, America, was still going on. So a mixture of cultures was happening, which ended up changing both sides of the world, of course. But unlike today, where the class society back then was really strictly adhered to, and that carried over obviously into travel, into the steamships. So Ginger and Haley's journey would have been very, very different than second class and especially third class passengers. So in first class, the norms of society, of the class distinctions, and was brought into the ship ethos and maintained. So the effort was to, I guess, a borrowed normalcy. So if you're in first class, they want to make you feel like you've hardly left home, that everything's going to be the same. You have, you wake up in the morning and there's a gentle knock at your door by the steward or whatever, and there's a warm basin of water for you to get washed up in, and you go to a breakfast with linen on the tables and stuff, and you spend your day playing cards and all the normal kind of gossip and the sort of
tea
unspoken
times.
The regulations for the classes would be very much in place. So it'd be like, everybody would be maneuvering around each other socially, the way they would back home, either in England or in Boston. And whereas the third class, there was no effort to bring any kind of borrowed normalcy to it. They were packed in a lot tighter, shared quarters. It was a lot more communal. They had, evenings there were sing-songs and card games, and the meals were not linen tables, and you didn't get greeted with a knock at your door with some warm water to wash your face in. If you did, it was cold water. And the meals were hearty. They weren't, you could live off them, but they were not at all.
They were simple.
Yeah. And even the places that you were allowed to go as a third class passenger, for example, there were different staircases, different stairways on the ship that you were not to go on. They weren't shared. First class and third class, they didn't share the same. And even some of the decks were also sequestered.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
And so if you're in first class, you can spend the day reading a book on the deck, and you would have a blanket covering you, a wool blanket that was brought to you on a nice chair to lounge back. You can, observe the sea and read your book, and somebody would come and serve you tea, and then you'd get notified it's time to go to a lunch, and the third class, nothing like that. You were allowed on some of the decks, but nobody's going to serve you tea, and there's just a big difference, which we would.
What can you tell us about, or what have you learned about just the way a steamship runs?
Well, there's a boiler room, and I don't know that much about how a steamship.
Is it coal?
Yeah.
So those images or movies and everything that you've seen where men are like shoveling coal, like in the Titanic, to keep
Yes.
it going, right? There's this hot, sweaty sort of work life environment that's morning to night. That's not, it's not the captain having dinner with the first class people. It's hard work to keep this ship going, and through, you know, storms and all of that. One of the things that in Murder on the SS Rosa is Ginger, the animals were taken care of by third class subjects. So they would hire people to take care of the animals for the first class people. So Ginger, because they weren't supposed to keep their animals with them, although a lot of first class people found a way to get around that rule. So in my story, Ginger had to deliver Boss to the third class area where the dogs were released to caregivers in third class. And that caregiver was a young boy named Scout. I think he was 7. He still had like the big teeth coming in and some missing teeth. And he's just this real character that's adorable and yet has to work hard for his living. He's an orphan. He's there with his older cousin. And they're working in third class. And so Ginger develops a little relationship with this boy, and he actually helps her with some of her investigation. And she does that not because she wants to use a boy to do her work for her, but she's trying to find a way to just give him a bit of cash, and he won't extra cash, and he's too proud to just take it for nothing. So she has to wrap it up as in like, this is a little job for you, for me. And he does become quite useful to her and in this regard too in the story. But Scout becomes a very ongoing person and a character in the story. And I did go into the series knowing he would be, because he was, I guess you would call it, one of the tropes where I wanted to bring a child into Ginger's life. Because, you know, you just see the world differently when there's a child involved.
And especially because he's from a completely different class. And
Yes.
grew up on the streets.
Yes.
So very, very different from Ginger's experience. So
And unlikely. And her backstory is she was married for 5 years. She was not able to conceive. And so she has a maternal instinct that has not been satisfied. And so she's really drawn to this little boy. Another really interesting historical piece, being 1920s, early 1920s, is Prohibition. Prohibition was, you know, off and running. It was at its, not its peak, I don't even think. It was like really getting its heels in the U.S. and yet it never was a thing at all in England or Britain. And so when these passengers from both countries would share a ship to cross one way or the other, there are these international waters where Americans no longer had to abide by the laws of the land. And so, you know, it just adds for an interesting dynamic. I'm always looking for ways to rub people against each other with their differences. And so Americans will consider at that point in time, and I talk about this a little bit in my blog post that I sort of write about this book and about these historical things, which I'll leave a link in underneath in the description if you're interested in it, and that elaborates on this a bit more. But there's a different sort of headspace that they were in. The Americans were like celebrating freedom and sort of the restrictions that they had, and it was a bit of a protest to like finally be able to drink without fear of being arrested. Whereas for the English, the British, it was just another drink.
what's the big deal?
Yeah. And so, yeah, it was just sort of another, just a sherry with after dinner sherry or something. So they had a different way of a relationship with alcohol that I think we still see today, actually. We've lived in Europe for a few years, like we, you know, we might have mentioned before. And it's true, there's a different sort of relationship or attitude towards alcohol there than there is in North America. So we're in Canada, and we have a lot of the same sort of mentality or relationship with alcohol that is, common south of the border. And so that's interesting. Do you have anything to add to that?
No. What about the being at sea and prohibition?
Yeah, well, that's what I mean.
About that?
Well, that was the thing. As soon as they crossed into international waters, they were no longer bound.
I wonder how that would have worked on the steamship. So you're on the ship, and you're.
Well, I think it depends who the captain is and who the ship belongs to. So in SS Rosa was a British captain. It was a British ship. So the British government sort of ruled the ship.
But you were allowed to, you were not, because you were inside U.S. waters for a certain amount of time. I'm just trying to work this out in my head, what it was like being on that ship. And you're an American, and you're traveling to Liverpool.
If you're getting on a British ship in Boston, I think the prohibition laws had to be adhered to until you crossed into international waters.
Yeah, that's the point that's interesting to me. Mm-hmm. So I really wish I could have that, glass of whiskey, but the captain hasn't. He gives an announcement over the PA.
Probably word would get out pretty fast.
Ladies and gentlemen, let her rip.
The bar is open.
And everybody floods into the bar area. I wonder how that works.
I mean, and if it was an American ship, I suppose it would be up to the captain. But once you hit, I guess it would just be up to the captain if they were going to adhere to the laws of their country, which they probably are. Obviously, they would have been. They were probably supposed to. I don't know if that could have been policed though and enforced. But I mean, there would be no booze on the ship if it came from the U.S.
I wonder about that.
Unless they picked it up. They pick it up on the international line from the bootleggers. That's how a lot of the booze got moved, like from Canada or from South America. They would meet ships across I think it's 12 miles out, I'm not sure. They would meet ships or boats just outside, on the other side of the international waters, and then they would get it, and then they would sneak it back in as the bootleggers, right?
Do you know this for sure? Are you making this up?
I do, because I'm not making it up, because I did some research for the Higgins and Hawk series.
Well, that sounds plausible.
Just jumping ahead 8 books, I take Haley becomes a spin-off series in her own, the Higgins and Hawk series, and so that's right at the tail end and the height of prohibition, just as it was starting to, this isn't gonna work, but it was still law. And the first book had a lot to do with rum running, which when we get to that series, we'll unpack that some more. So there's a lot of great historical features, tidbits, and trivia that we are going to be talking about in this podcast. So just staying on the whole thing about alcohol, what was very popular at the time, and I suppose they're still popular in different clubs and stuff, but cocktails were like this, I don't know if they were new, but they were kind of a new fascination being created. And, being, a society person, you would go to your bar and order your favorite cocktail, which would be I got something written down, like a sidecar or a white lady. They would have these interesting, cool names, mostly some sort of gin concoction. But that was part of the culture there, which leads us to, just segueing into the pop culture in general was really fascinating in the 1920s, which was one of the reasons why I started this series in the first place, was because I wanted to become an expert in all things 1920s. That was my goal when I started the Ginger Gold Mystery Series. And there was just, at the beginning, there was just so much. It's almost the temptation is to overuse the cultural pop culture references when you first start a series like this, which I probably did. And as the series moves on, I that fell away. But you don't want to be saying the bee's knees all the time, right? And
mentioning the Charles, having the characters dance the Charleston.
Dance the Charleston
every
all the
single
time.
book, they have to have the Charleston.
yes, and then you're talking about fashion, the flapper dresses, and the feather in the hair. And I did have a means to my madness. Is that how I'd say it?
A method to your
method to
madness.
my madness, because obviously I did need to talk about fashions if you're going to set something in the 1920s, and it is something that turned out to set me apart as an author. A lot of readers really appreciated the fact that I went into detail about different things that just made the setting and the world and the costumes come to life. But I did have, this big thick book on fashion of the 1920s that went through all the years. So I would flip through the book and I'm like, oh, she's wearing this. And so then I would describe that and I'd be able to visually see it myself. Or I would go on the internet and also look for fashions from 1920s fall fashion catalog and pull that up and say, oh, she's going to be wearing this coat or whatever, and describe it that way. So that's how I sort of made the costumes realistic in these books. The other thing are films. One of the characters, side characters in this particular story was a film star, silent film star. And even though they were mostly Hollywood actresses, they were well known on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. And some of the main ones were, you might have heard these names: Clara Bow, Louise Brooks, and Mary Pickford. There were a few. There were quite a few. And there was some into Rudolph Valentino and Mary Pickford's husband, forget his name. But they were big stars in their day, just like our stars are in our day. You can just name somebody, Brad Pitt, I don't know, somebody you would consider American royalty. That's what these real life people were like. But for some of them, when the talkies came, there was like actual, you could hear people talk. They didn't make the transition very well, because it turned out that a lot of them had not very pleasant sounding actual voices in actual real life. For maybe they had bad accents or bad nasal twang or whatever, and it just didn't translate well into talkies. So they start off as being these silent film stars because they're usually beautiful and they've got these soft lens and they can really emote well what's going on, and what they're saying is being or thinking is being written on the screen. But when they actually had to talk in a talkie, when there was sound, it didn't translate well. And so a lot of them lost their jobs and their identity, and a new batch kind of came up.
So this book takes place in 1923, and maybe you don't know this, maybe you do. I should know it, but what was the predominant film that you would go see in a theater? Was it still silent film, or was this a transition time?
It was a transition time. So people were still predominantly silent because theaters themselves had to be equipped for sound. So it wasn't just Hollywood now being able to make films that could register the sound, but theaters also had to. And so that took some time. So you would have certain one maybe or two theaters in a city that could do it, but all the rest of them were still silent until.
Yeah, I think it was a slow, if we're on the subject of talkies and silent movies. Charlie Chaplin didn't make his first talking movie until quite a bit later.
Yes. So it was a slow thing, but I mean, women also aged out, right? Men could go a lot longer, but women back then, by the time they hit their 30s, they would be sort of out of work. So that was sort of a bit of the cultural situations that people were in real life and also in my fictional world for,
And of course, jazz music.
yes, jazz music. What do you know about jazz music?
Well, it was kind of an import from the U.S. at that time, and it was starting to really influence England, the jazz scene. And that really musically was the real backdrop of the 1920s.
Well, that's the thing about the 20s and why it's so fascinating to write in that era is because there was so many big changes that were taking place all in a short period of time. Prior to the World War I, it was still a relatively Victorian age. Women had long hair, they put it up, they never wore makeup, they cinched in their waists. They wore, everything was tied up nice and tight, corsets and boots. And out through the war, because women had to, ditch a lot of that stuff in order to do some work at home, to be land girls and all of that. They had to do the work of men. They couldn't, all those restrictions just weren't practical. And so when the war ended, of course, they didn't want to go back to that. And the younger generation, the ones that served in the war, primarily the women and stuff, they were just not having any of it to go back. And not only that, there was money. There was the stock market was really hot, which we know didn't end well by the end of this decade. But you had money, you had women who were like cutting their hair as a response to just being free. They're getting rid of all the waistbands and the corsets. They were raising the hemlines. They were dancing. They were wearing makeup. There was a lot of electrical appliances that came online around then too. So suddenly women had a little bit more free time because now they could hoover, vacuum. They had toasters. They had ice boxes. Some of them, came online, mostly for the ones that had money, but a lot of people had money during this stage. And it was really the golden era. And so it was a fascinating time. And, they couldn't see the future and how it was going to not turn out so hot, but we know that now. So
that's kind of the historical context of the SS Rosa, because SS Rosa is the beginning book of the series.
Yes, it's sort of what launched the world of Ginger Gold that I began building book by book by book. And so just to kind of sort of wrap it all up here, this is the first book of the series, the Ginger Gold Mystery Series. It's where I'm just developing Ginger as a character. She changes over time because I get to know her better as well. And I get to know her history a little bit better. But at this point, and maybe it's, good, she doesn't wear she's a glass half full character. So even though she's had hardships in life, she's always going to have a positive, outgoing outlook and wanting to make the best of every situation. And that's what she's doing here. She's saying goodbye to Boston for now. She's going to go home to England, settle her affairs, and decide what she wants to do with her life. Because, she's still relatively young. In 1923, how old was she? I think she was 30. I think she was 30. I wrote her to be 30 or 29. Just coming into it. So she's widowed, the war is over, she's got this big inheritance, so she's got autonomy financially, but it's a wide open canvas. She doesn't know what to do with her life, and so this sets it up for the rest of the series. And so the next book that we want to talk about, that we'll talk about in the next episode, will be Book 2, Murder at Hartigan House. And that is the house that she has inherited, her childhood home. And so we'll find out what happens there. And it's actually a pretty cool little I guess I can say that because I wrote it, but it's actually a cool mystery.
You're not the only one who says so.
Thank you.
Judging by all the many, many reviews and people who love
Yes.
the books.
So thank you for joining us today. We will put relevant links in the description. That would include the corresponding blog post, my Patreon community, if you're interested in that. We have a lot of free content there, but what I call my inner circle gets this podcast and an extended version of this podcast and early access. So if that is something that you would think you might be interested, you can check that out. The links will be below. And also links to Murder on the SS Rosa if you haven't had a chance to check that out. So thanks again for joining us at Strauss Cafe Podcast.
Thanks, everyone.